Welcome to Artstop. My name is Regina and I'm the Associate Curator here at the beautiful San Diego Museum of Art. And today we are going to be talking about Mary Cassatt's portrait of Simone in a blue bonnet. Now, by the time Mary Cassatt painted this portrait, she had not only firmly established herself as a professional artist, but also, more specifically, as an impressionist. But going back in time a bit, Mary Cassatt was born into an upper-class banking family in what is now Pittsburgh. And while during Cassatt's lifetime, it was really quite normal for a woman of the upper class to study the arts, it was generally only as an amateur, and it was never intended that those studies would turn into a professional career. As a result, Mary Cassatt's parents were not necessarily thrilled when they learned that their daughter wanted to be a professional artist. Nevertheless, around the age of 15 years old, they agreed that she could enroll at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. And she did just that, and she stayed there for a few years. Ultimately, however, Cassatt decided that she wasn't satisfied with the training she was receiving, and she decided to leave the academy, and she moved to Europe, where she studied for a few years traveling abroad. Ultimately, however, Cassatt decided to settle indefinitely in Paris in 1874, and it was there that the famed impressionist Edgar Degas first saw Cassatt's work exhibited, and he sought her out. And it was from that point forward that Cassatt and Degas established a friendship, and Degas, to a certain extent, even became a mentor to Cassatt. And most importantly, Degas is the artist who actually invited Mary Cassatt to exhibit with the Impressionists. And this is really quite important because Mary Cassatt was the only artist ever invited to do so, male or female. And she went on to exhibit with them for 4 out of their 8 exhibitions. Now, this portrait was done around 1903 and is actually one of about 20 renditions of the same little girl, Simone, who, quite conveniently, lived near to Cassatt's home about 50 miles north of Paris. And this painting really exemplifies the work for which Cassatt is best known. The loose brushwork and the vivid hues really exemplify the Impressionist movement, a movement that, above all other things, was concerned with the depiction of color and with the depiction of light. And as we look more closely at the portrait, specifically at Simone's face, we can see that it has a certain weight to it, a certain gravity that the rest of the canvas doesn't have. And this, coupled with the rose of her cheeks and the pink of her lips, really helps to breathe life into the portrait. But as we move outwards, specifically looking at the bonnet almost seems to dissipate the further we get into the background. It almost seems to disappear. And yet Cassatt has given us just enough information that our mind essentially fills in those gaps, and we know exactly what it is that we're looking at. The same can very much be said for the ribbon beneath Simone's chin, which is even more vaguely rendered. And if anything, it's the lack of color that really helps us to determine exactly what it is we're looking at. Now, this painting was done in oil on canvas, but many of the renditions that Cassatt did of Simone were actually done in pastel. And pastel is essentially a chalk. It's made up of a powdered pigment mixed with a binding agent. And pastel really reached its peak in the mid-1700s, but then it subsequently fell out of favor for about 100 years. And it really wasn't until the Impressionists picked up pastel in the late 1800s and revived it that it once again gained in popularity. And the Impressionists really loved pastel because they liked its immediate effect. They liked the spontaneity that it allowed. Because as opposed to working in oil on canvas, pastel allows artists to layer colors without having to wait for drying periods. They also loved pastel because of the bright colors that they could achieve. And we get a sense of that love of bright colors even here in this oil on canvas with these neon greens and pinks and yellows and blues that Cassatt has chosen to use. Now, Cassatt is known for having once stated that she felt that pastel was, quote, the most satisfactory medium when portraying children, owing to the fact that kids cannot sit still for long periods of time. And this could indeed serve as an explanation, or at least partial explanation, as to why the lower third of the canvas is left unfinished. Working in oil on canvas would have been much more slower going than working in pastel. And Cassatt's focus on her sitter, on Simone's face, would have taken precedent over the surroundings. However, I think this lack of finish really helps to suggest the exuberant nature of children. It helps to imbue the painting with a sense of movement and activity, and really tells us that this is a fleeting moment in this little girl's day. Now, Mary Cassatt is best known above all other things for her depictions of women and children. And while her choice in subject matter surely was her own, it was also very much a product of the period in which she lived. While Cassatt was very fortunate in that, having been born into an upper-class wealthy family, she had the luxury of studying art and producing art without financial pressure, she was still subject to the popular social notions governing women's roles during her lifetime. And just as women in general were encouraged to work within certain occupations, women artists were encouraged to study certain genres and work in certain mediums. Sculpture, for example, during Cassatt's lifetime, was generally regarded as a masculine form of art because of the physical strength and force needed in order to execute commissions, as well as the necessity for the artist to get dirty. Not very ladylike. Floral and portrait paintings, on the other hand, were encouraged, as these are genres that could be executed within the domestic sphere, within the confines of domesticated gardens. And also because during Cassatt's lifetime, floral and portrait paintings were not believed to require a higher thought process. Watercolor is a medium that was actually promoted as being perfectly suited to the woman artist, owing to the fact that it was actually advertised during Cassatt's lifetime as being, quote, easy to handle. Now, Mary Cassatt must have enjoyed depicting children. She did so time and time again, but many women artists during Cassatt's lifetime chose them for pragmatic reasons as well. And this is due to the fact that during Cassatt's lifetime, women came to be seen as the best suited for depicting children due to the widely shared and sexist assumption that women inherently knew more about children than men did. Contrary to this, though, we know that Mary Cassatt never married, never had any kids, and therefore the life she chose to lead did not necessarily align with the subject matter that she was depicting. Jessie Wilcox Smith is another artist who worked and lived during Cassatt's lifetime, who was renowned for her depictions of children. And much like Cassatt, Jessie Wilcox Smith never married, never had any kids, and in fact lived the majority of her life with a female companion. And as such, the lives that Cassatt and Smith chose to lead did not necessarily align with the subject matter that they were depicting. And what this suggests to us is their ingenuity as modern women, their ingenuity as professional artists, because they were able to identify a commercially viable means of artistic production and employment that would fit within the parameters of what was considered to be socially acceptable for them as women. And they were able to exploit that and use that to have highly successful, lucrative careers. Now, just because women artists were encouraged to work in certain genres or use certain mediums does not mean that they always abided by these parameters. And in fact, we know that Mary Cassatt executed a monumental mural commission for the 1893 Chicago World's Fair entitled Modern Woman, and it hung in the Woman's Building. And it was a mammoth undertaking, 14 feet high by 58 feet wide. Quite a difference as compared to little Simone here. And Cassatt was really quite brilliant in her execution of this mural because she did not paint it in situ in Chicago where it was to hang, but rather she executed the commission on the confines of her estate north of Paris. And what she did is she converted the greenhouse on her estate into a muralist studio. And she dug a ditch and she created an elaborate pulley system whereby she could roll out and roll up different portions of this monumental 14-foot high by 58-foot wide canvas as she wanted to work on it. And in doing this, Cassatt eliminated the need to work on top of ladders or to climb scaffolding. And this is really quite important because during Cassatt's lifetime, mural painting, much like sculpture, was considered to be a masculine form of art because of the physical strength and stamina needed in order to undertake these mammoth commissions. And so by creating this muralist studio and digging that ditch and creating that elaborate pulley system, Cassatt alleviated any physical issues that she might have faced when undertaking this commission. Physical issues that, it should be noted, male and female artists alike would have faced when undertaking such a large commission. Now, Mary Cassatt lived into her early 80s, and like most of us as she got older, she began to suffer from different ailments. Arthritis, diabetes, and worst of all for Cassatt, cataracts. Sadly, by about 1915, only about 12 years after this painting was completed, Cassatt had to give up painting altogether as a result of being nearly blind, even though she didn't pass away until 1926. Now, I mention all of this about what it's like to work as a woman artist during Cassatt's lifetime, and I mention her monumental undertaking for the World's Fair, because oftentimes artists are more than meets the eye. We see artists in a certain way because we are taught to see artists in a certain way, but sometimes singular works of art don't tell us the full story. So in thinking about what it was like to work as a woman artist during Cassatt's lifetime can help us to better understand why she chose the subject matter that she chose to depict. And in thinking about commissions that don't necessarily fit within the normal parameters of what we think of when we think of a Mary Cassatt, like her World's Fair mural, can help us to better understand the scope and the ability of an artist. So while Simone in a Blue Bonnet is indeed a quintessential example of a Mary Cassatt, and a lovely one at that, it is more than that. It's a springboard. It's a springboard from which we can better understand Mary Cassatt as an artist, and it's a springboard from which we can better understand the period and the cultures in which she lived and worked. Thank you.